Thank you for listening to this episode of Lending Thoughts, sponsored by Rocket Pro. Today, I have a great discussion with Kyle Dionne, Senior Director of both brokerage and lender operations at Rocket Mortgage Canada. Kyle and I have a great discussion about the need for speed and certainty in the mortgage process, what Blackjack means to mortgages, and the importance of closing in 21 days or less. And we talk about the importance of building culture on teams and his process for going about doing that. You're not going to want to miss this episode. Have a listen in. Kyle, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So you know the drill here. Can you tell us your life story in 60 seconds or less, please?
The time aspect is the hard part, not because I have many exciting things to talk about, because I like to talk. I was born and raised in Windsor, got an honors degree in Labour Studies and Sociology, got a minor in Psych. After that, stuck around at the University of Windsor, got my teaching degree. Knew I wanted to travel. So I left Windsor after graduation and moved to London with my then girlfriend, now wife. Diana is her name. We packed everything up in 2 hockey bags, just a bunch of clothes, few $1,000s between us, nothing really figured out yet. Didn't have a full-time job lined up, but did start taking day-to-day gigs as a substitute teacher, quickly hired on as a full-time teacher in North London. Got my first leadership position leading phys ed when I was around 25. Worked in a few different school leadership positions and loved leading teachers and seeing the impact we had on kids. During that time out there, we did a bunch of traveling. My wife gave birth to an amazing little boy named Oscar Lorenzo. Before we knew it, a full decade had gone by, and then COVID hit. At that point, my wife's parents had some health issues, but thankfully a little company by the name of Rocket Mortgage was putting down roots in my hometown. So my wife and I made a decision to pack up our lives in a shipping container. We accumulated a few things since the hockey bag days, and we moved the family back to Canada during the pandemic to join Rocket, almost on the ground floor. Started my career in mortgages as a mortgage agent. Knew I had to really push myself, or this would have been the ultimate ball drop. Living in London with the opportunity to travel into Europe and leadership positions all ironed out. But thankfully it did pan out. I worked really hard, was promoted to team captain, then director of sales development, where I developed a training program for our new agents. And over time, I was asked to lead the broker operations team, then took on the lender ops team as well, which serves both our internal agents as well as our Rocket Pro business. And here we are today.
Okay. Well summarized. Thank you so much for sharing that. So we'll start with this brokerage operations team in which you started out by leading and continue to lead today for Rocket. So what does that exactly mean? I think the traditional mortgage agent thinks about themselves as their operations team, right? They get the application from the client. They are asking the client for the necessary documentation in order to meet the conditions of the mortgage. And
Yep.
Ultimately, they go on to fulfill all those conditions and get their broker complete that they need and push it over to the lawyer and get to closing. So what does broker operations actually mean, and what do those folks do?
Awesome. Yeah. So when I first took on the role, the broker ops team was more in the background. So our team is made up predominantly of document specialists and closing specialists. And from there, it was an assembly line, mentality where the agent would get the client committed. They'd submit the application. We'd get our conditional approval. From there, the document specialist would be busily working in the background. They'd handle about 40 files per person. And then from there, the agent was still doing much of the communication on the front end. So they were still the face with the client all the way through. Then the closing specialist would come in at broker complete. And at that point, that's working with the lawyer, working with the title company, working with the client to make sure that everything gets buttoned up and is as smooth as possible towards the end of the process. But since then, we've evolved, and our aim was to help increase agent allocations ultimately and keep them in front of new business more often. So we changed our model a bit, and the document specialist evolved into what we call a loan processor. And essentially, they still do that document specialist work where they're going to be handling the documents and doing a lot of the, putting together DocuSign packages and things in the back end, but they're also managing the client relationship from CA to BC. And so at that point there, we had to really evolve our team because a lot of these people, when they came in, they had the skills to do the loan processor job effectively, but not all of them fully believed in themselves and having that ability. And I think it gave them a bit of concern or anxiety to be the one handling that client and all the objections that can happen. Because obviously anyone in the mortgage industry knows, Once the commitment letter is there, it becomes real. Getting that signed, that's where rubber hits the road for a lot of clients, and they start to get a little bit worried and thinking, am I doing the right thing? So huge responsibility on the broker ops team to get that closed, and they've done an amazing job.
So can you just talk about the learning? It sounds like there's been some evolution of those roles over time. And it sounds like one of the major things was in the early days, you talked about the document specialist, they were not communicating with the clients.
No.
The agent would continue to communicate with the client. So the document specialist in that case would review the conditions, think about what's needed, but then they would ultimately go back to the agent and tell the agent, hey, here's the things that are needed on this file, and try to get these as fast as possible.
Exactly.
The evolution sounds like we got to this loan processor role where the loan processor would actually take over communications after the conditional approval was issued.
Yeah.
Why was that the strategic shift that was chosen, and what do we think the lesson is there, and what have we learned since doing that?
Yeah, good question. I think we learned that it is possible, right? Clients, as long as there's a nice, smooth handover where everything is foreshadowed beautifully. You're very familiar with this analogy, Bekim, I know, because I've heard you say it, but this idea of a haunted house analogy really comes into play. So what I'm going to do next, Mr. and Mrs. Client, is I'm going to submit your application to the lender, and from there we'll get a commitment letter back. And from that point forward, you can be working with an amazing loan processor. Their name is so-and-so, and they're going to be with you every step of the way. Of course, I will as well, more so in the background, though. If you need me at any point, you can reach out. But your loan processor is very, very capable, and they're document experts, and they're going to help get you broker complete. So for us to get that evolution to actually happen effectively, it was more than just writing some scripts for them. It was more than, kind of putting in a process, but it was also helping develop the people. So we run our operations team like a sales team. And ultimately, we don't want them to be order takers. We want them to be, order givers. We use personal branding like any good client-facing person should to build trust with the client. But we also teach them to use assumptive language, right? We teach them how to mirror the client. We teach them how to build rapport. We explain the importance of firm appointment setting and document deadlining. And that's not to trick the client to doing something they shouldn't do, but ultimately, we do know that completing a mortgage transaction is an adult activity. And adult activities are those things that you put on a to-do list that keep getting put off and put off and put off and put off. And obviously, when you work in the mortgage industry, when you put off all the things that you need to do on the way to close, what ends up happening is you have a really bad experience in the 11th hour. So our overall mission is to show our clients how much we care and to guide them through the process, with the least amount of friction as possible, I suppose.
Yeah. So you talked a little bit about process orchestration. You talked about the importance of communication and foreshadowing. Couldn't agree more, for those who are unfamiliar with the haunted house analogy that we often throw around in our world. It's like, hey, a haunted house is only scary because it's dark and you don't know what's coming around the corner. But if they were to flip the lights on, wouldn't be that scary. And really flipping the lights on is just telling the client constantly what's coming next.
Yeah.
I'm curious though, what is the ultimate goal of the process, right? Is it speed? Is it certainty? What have you figured out when it comes to processing a mortgage? What matters most so that we can do the best job of it and get the highest reviews in return and the highest rates of referrals and clients coming back to us and things like that? What are you ultimately trying to achieve and why?
I think it's a little bit of both. It's both speed and certainty, because you can do things really, really quickly and make a bunch of mistakes or overpromise and underdeliver, and you provided a terrible experience. Certainty, of course, means that when I tell you something's going to happen, it does happen and it's predictable. We have an emphasis on both. One of the things that we found over the years, regardless of the submission date and the time from the submission date all the way to the closing date, whether it's the full 120 days out, if we can get our clients broker complete in 21 days or less, we have a higher pull through essentially. And there's more likelihood that mortgage is going to close. And ultimately that's the client's goal and that's our goal as well. So we have something we call our Blackjack deals, right? And our team's pushing towards that. That being said, there's the speed aspect of it, but also the certainty aspect in saying that, getting them to broker complete, that gives them that certainty. At that point, the deal's gone through pre-fund. They know they truly can get excited in waiting for their mortgage to close. But that's been a big push for us, and it's been very successful for our team.
Certainly. Yeah. The branding around Blackjack being that of 21 days is a beautiful thing.
Perfect.
It's perfect, right? And to speak to that a little bit more, because, I tracked it closely, obviously, and what we discovered through the data was that once the 21 days had passed, the likelihood of that mortgage closing actually started to go down.
Yeah.
Something around that period for clients, it just stood out, and that like by then they expected to know for sure whether or not their mortgage was good to close, whether it was set to, close a week from then or 2 months from that time. 3 weeks in, they're like, I'm done working on my mortgage. Now I need you to say that we're good to go and let's move on to the next step here, which is me sitting on my hands waiting to sign the final paperwork. If you can't give me that level of confidence by X date, I'm going to start wondering whether or not you're going to actually get this done for me. And that's a scary feeling, but you're back in the haunted house, right?
Yeah. I think when we started, we made our first goal. This is when we had, agents doing most of the outreach, and obviously agents' jobs are very, very busy, right? So you're expecting them to find new clients. But then when they were being asked to process their loan on the back end with the help of a document specialist, it's just too many plates to spin. And at that point, our percentage of deals that went broker complete within 21 days, again, regardless of submission date and funding date, it was around 60%. And that's where we kind of lived. But since we've evolved our model and had our loan processors handle that part and allowed the agent to focus solely on new business, this month we're at over 80% right now. And it's been consistent 13 months in a row that they've gone beyond their goal, which was 66% at first. And we've raised our goal, obviously, to 70 because, if you keep hitting the goal, you got to raise the goal. So they've continued to meet the challenge. And I will shout out, if he's out there listening, our leader for this team, Peter Santeris, with the help of Kyle Dionne, who's the team captain. They've done such an amazing job championing this message and leading from the front.
That's really well said. So I'm curious about the challenges that arise when creating a process like this, because I've talked to many brokers, agents over the years, and what they tell me is, hey, like we've heard this many times. I think Rocket in the US pioneered some of this in a lot of ways, task-driven processing exercises. And where a lot of people break down is in like all the minute details of what the agent knows after having all those conversations with the client to what the ops processing team now knows about the client. I mean, something as simple as, hey, I'm going to get you all these documents this week, but next week I'm actually, I'm traveling abroad and I won't be available. Well, that deal gets passed, right? It's conditionally approved. It's in the hands of a loan processor now. The loan processor is calling that client every 2-3 days to be like, hey, I need you to submit these documents. The client gets back only to find out they got a bunch of text messages and emails from their loan processor. And they're like, hey, I told you guys that I was going to be out of town. Why are you blowing up my phone?
Yeah.
That's just one of like a million examples. Or, hey, I'm working on this, divorce document as a part of this process. And I told you that I would, submit it as X date. And you're sending me an every 3-day follow-up email saying, where's the document? And all these things. Like, how do you prevent against the breakdown in communication and experience for the client, given that there is so much sitting with the agent as a part of that original relationship that is now getting passed on?
Yeah. So as I mentioned in my opening 60-second intro, which probably went past 60 seconds, before I came from ops, I was in sales, and my role as the director of sales development meant that all new agents passed through my team. So when I moved to ops, I was in a really great position to try to bring the two teams together. One of the first things that we did is we brought them into the same office and made sure that their office space coincided, because a lot of those breakdowns did happen and I think would continue to happen if the two teams saw themselves as two teams and not one team. So getting them just together was a big win, getting them to trust each other, and also making sure that our sales team knew how hard our operations team was working and made sure that they realized all these wins that were happening as they were happening. Anybody who works in the industry knows, anybody who's in sales knows that the minute you put your trust in, say, any other stakeholder, whether it's, a loan processor or a lawyer or what have you, you're really going to remember that one loan that goes sideways. So reminding them that, that one loan is one of 100, maybe, right, that went sideways, but the other 99 were beautiful, right? They worked out wonderfully. So don't get lost in that one bad experience that happened, but then also not pushing it to the side or explaining it away, but also doing a post-mortem on those and making sure that we can understand where things went wrong and how we can be better. I got a great relationship with all the sales leaders, and it's been awesome to be able to refine our processes together to make sure that our two teams, as I mentioned already, work as one team.
Yeah, it makes so much sense. I mean, I've heard you use the analogy in the past of front of house, back of house.
The kitchen analogy.
That's right. Think about it as a restaurant, right? Like the server's out there.
The server is the mortgage agent. Just for those who aren't familiar with the analogy, I think it's a beautiful one.
That's right. So the server is the mortgage agent. The server's getting face to face. They're making a bunch of promises. Oh, for sure. You want the steak?
Out hot. It'll be here. Don't worry.
Medium, done, right? But like they're not actually cooking the steak medium.
Yeah.
They're ultimately handing a ticket back to the back of the house, and they're relying on that thing to come out medium, and then they go and deliver it, and ultimately the client's customer is sitting on the other side, and they're holding that individual responsible. So it's very easy if the back of the house isn't delivering to start really getting frustrated with that. And it's very easy sometimes to forget all the good things, you know, the other 99 orders.
Exactly.
In which they nailed it. So I like that you use the word trust there. I mean, it ultimately does rely on a belief that both sides are trying their absolute best to make it happen. And when people start to believe those things to be true on both sides, that it creates a better working relationship. It creates a, as we say, #one team environment. And we work towards ultimately the consumer above our own needs, right?
Exactly.
So you had mentioned that from the time in leading brokerage operations, you went on to lead lender operations. We launched our lender, for those unfamiliar, in 2023 in and around June, got to market, and you start underwriting loans. And there are some similarities to the processing of mortgage in the brokerage operations division, but there are also a lot of differences. Number one, you're sitting on a completely different technology stack. So you've got to go and you've got to learn a whole new technology stack. You got to integrate that technology stack. You have to train new people to do things, oftentimes, even if they're experienced underwriters, to do them your way, right? Because it's like, hey, like I appreciate that you've been doing this for 20 years, but we do things a little bit differently here. And you probably feel like you've got this thing nailed down after 20 years, but we have a mindset of getting 1% better every day. And I need you to like reset and think about how we can do this better. So what challenges did you face in the times when you were taking over, you know, the lender operations and underwriting side of the business so that we could actually ultimately fund these mortgages?
I think ultimately you nailed it. There's the way that other lenders have been operating for so many years. And when you've got experienced underwriters who have seen it only done that way for those number of years, sometimes kind of challenging those assumptions was something that I had to do when I first came, because I saw things through a broker lens first. So I saw it, you know, from a different perspective. And that's not to say that people on the lending team who were there already were reluctant to change or were not open to finding a better way, because they were. That's why we hired them on. Ultimately, you know, that's a big part of our interview process, is making sure that we've got the right people on the bus. I think we do a pretty damn good job of that. But that was a big challenge, I think, in terms of, as you mentioned, you know, working with, you know, a whole different system and making sure that it was integrating well with our pre-existing systems, and then also making sure that that team integrated well with our broker operations team, who had been kind of doing things their way, and our agents as well. And then, as you know, that lending team by lead, it also serves our Rocket Pro business as well. So it's also, you know, finding a way to make sure that those experienced brokers who are external to Rocket are amazed and impressed by what we deliver. And through that, how we did that was through a lot of feedback, right? So just listening to what the brokers are after, putting ourselves through the process, you know, making sure that we see from you know, walking through the front door of the business, what's it like for a broker who's going to send a deal to Rocket Pro? What sort of experience are they going to have? And then just making sure that we've got things in place with our underwriters in terms of, you know, non-negotiables, right? Something as simple as like, you know, no bad news is ever delivered, you know, through email, right? So picking up the phone and having a conversation, because ultimately that one deal is so important. It's that broker's paycheck, and you don't want to get bad news sent to you in an email, even if it's, you know, we need to rework this. The deal's not dead, but we need to rework this. That's bad news, right? The broker submitted it and they thought we were good to go. So to hit them with anything, you know, in terms of an email to say that we've got to change course, it's something that we don't do. And it's been a great experience so far. Amazing feedback over and over again from our brokers. And, you know, we've got amazing BDMs and Dan and Tori who are fielding, you know, a lot of conversations with our outside brokers. And the feedback has been great. It's helped us grow, and it's also reaffirmed that we are doing the right thing.
You mentioned getting feedback from these brokers and you talked about our BDMs, and it sounds like you're talking about our underwriters too. It sounds like there's a lot of communication going back to the broker. Is that in that process, the biggest learning for you is just that communication aspect above all else? I think a lot of people in the industry, they often point to the fact that, hey, like, we can get super creative with underwriting or we can do, X, Y, Z. But you're talking about something which sounds simple on the surface, but probably is not that easy in that, like, hey, like all those other things are going to be there, but we're actually focused on the communication piece. Can you just speak to how we identified how that was so important and what we had to do culturally to change that?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I think when it comes to underwriting, we're all underwriting from essentially the same place. You've got to underwrite to the insurer's guidelines or to your investor's guidelines. We work at the lender themselves, to the lender's guidelines. And ultimately, you can ask people to underwrite faster and do all these sort of things. But ultimately, you have to work through and create some processes that allows us to focus our energy on the right things at the right time. And that's one of the things that we've done with Rocket Pro Zero. Any deals that come in with docs in, we make sure that those docs are reviewed so we can send that CL out with a bit more certainty. In terms of the communication aspect, you're spot on. That's the biggest thing that needed to be, I guess, worked on for anybody, because when you're asking someone to underwrite really, really quickly, it just seems to be easier in that moment to just fire off a quick email. But that's not how brokers want to be communicated with. Let's at least go through a text. Text messages are nice and quick. People are on their phones all the time, but also having those conversations is how we're going to build up those relationships. That's how you get people to trust you, right? And you get people to want to work with you again if you show them how much you care, right? The Roosevelt quote, which is another great one. Nobody cares how much you know until you show them how much you care. So if we can show the brokers how invested we are in their own business, then we think that that's a huge inch for us.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, it puts the underwriter also in the seat of effectively being in sales in some fashion. And the reason why I say that, like, sales is often correlated with like trying to like get people to do something. But the reality is sales is just truly communication. So you're putting them in the role of communicator from the seat of, who would be better to have that communication than the person working on that mortgage at that time. Yep. And give a real-time update of, hey, I'm struggling to make X work. What if we looked at Y? Yep. And let's work on this together? And I hear those conversations daily from our underwriters, and they're fantastic. They're ultimately, seeking solutions. Yep. With the broker hand in hand and saying, here's the trouble that we're having and getting this over the line, and here's where we need to go. And here's a few ideas. Can we do this or can we do that? And when people take the approach of communication and collaboratively to try to find the solution ultimately for the client, then it's much better that way.
We've got some amazing underwriters. And again, coming from the broker space and coming from, before broker operations sales, I've worked with some underwriters, never mention names, right? But or specific lenders that you've worked with, but sometimes it feels like they don't want to do the deal. And it's like, well, aren't we all in the business of writing loans, right? Whereas like when you have conversations on the floor with our team, they truly want to make the deal work. And I'm so impressed at what length they will go, what conversations they'll have with insurers to try to, sell the deal, right, to the insurer to see if this is something that they'd have an appetite for. And they work tirelessly for our brokers. I'm super impressed by all of them.
That's fantastic. So thinking about that culture and thinking about something you said earlier around, getting people to maybe question some of the original assumptions that they had coming in, especially if you've done underwriting as an example for a long time, you build up a set of best practices, and the things that got you to where you are might not be the things that are going to get you to where you want to go. So it really takes a first principles mindset to question some of the deepest assumptions that we have about what works and what doesn't. What things do you do that will get people who are experts and professionals in this game and have been doing it for a long time to go back and think from first principles about how we can do things differently? How do you culturally build that into your part of the organization?
Well, one of the first things I did when I joined the lending operations team is just work really, really closely with people, right? So spend as much time as possible with the people that I was going to be working with, asking them questions, find out what's working well for them. What do they feel is something that slows them down or stands in their way? What can we change? What can we enhance to make, not only our clients' experience better, but their team member experience? So I think doing that is the first step. Also, finding some quick wins, right? Finding some things that you can show them that making these suggestions actually leads to something, because we do act on them. That's a big part of our culture. And showing them that sometimes there is a better way. It's not necessarily one that you're used to or one that you've done, in the past, but we're going to work together to find better ways. We're going to make subtle improvements all the time, right? Especially when you've dialed in a process and it works from beginning to end. It's about finding those little incremental improvements that you can make that slowly improves things bit by bit. Getting the team as part of that process is really, really important.
I mean, the trouble there is often how regulated the lending industry is, right? You want to make drastic changes. You see the opportunities for improvement in the underwriting process. Some of those things are just flat out prescriptive and dictated down, right, from the powers that be to make us do things a certain way, even if there is a better way. For sure, some of those things are, probably going to come to roost here in the coming years. But I think about the ability to verify things digitally, for example, right? Like even, pre-COVID, for example, like many of these things had to be hand signed. You had to print documents off, and then COVID happened, and it was like, okay, we'll take e-signatures on these moving forward. It was like we should have always taken e-signatures.
And then we went back in BC. We went back first. So.
Yeah. It was like, okay, yeah, there was like some emergency measures put in place. And then for some reason, we went back to getting wet signatures on specific documents. There are more and better ways nowadays to verify credit than, previously existed. There are better ways to verify assets and pay stubs and things like that. We seem to have a reluctance in our industry to adapt to these things. And I think the frustrating part is, especially when you see it and you are a first principles thinker and you do take a step back and say, there's a better way.
Yep.
Unfortunately for now, though, we need to keep doing things the way that we always have, the way they were done 30 years ago, despite the fact that they probably just don't make sense in today's environment. And it creates a bit of an innovator's dilemma in that sense. So I know you're somebody who's always looking to innovate, create, think from the start of something and think about how we could do it better. When you think about the lending industry as it exists today, what is something that you're excited about for the future? What is something that you think needs to change such that we can better serve consumers in the end?
Well, I'm still holding on for open banking. I think a lot of what you described there is just that, and that will make things so much better for consumers, I truly believe. But also, as we all know, the buzzword of 2024 more so was AI. So using AI to help do some document processing for us. Specifically, you think of like bank statements, right? If you got more than one borrower on an application and there's down payment coming from multiple sources and you've got 90 days of this and 90 days of that, it can be very, very time consuming and mistakes can be made. That's a big area that I think is obviously going to really take off and make things better and more accurate. There's also a lot of work out there right now being done with AI voice generators. And I think with those are going to be super exciting for the industry in terms of removing some of the mundane conversations that have to happen throughout the mortgage process and speeding things up and allowing our teams to be more efficient, to focus on the conversations that matter most. And obviously there's some programs out there, kind of simpler ones, I'd say, that are helping us, design our SOPs, right? So like gone are the days where you'd have to take hours to dial in a process and then have to go back to that and refine it with every minute detail that you've changed. Those programs out there like Scribe, for example, is one of them, which is fantastic, which is going to help us create better SOPs, which can then be used for process refinement and rolling out training so much more effectively.
I'm going to switch it on you for just a second. I want to talk about culture with you, Kyle, because I've personally watched you lead 3 teams at our business, and in each area that you led, you ultimately developed a really strong culture in those parts of the business, ones that are focused on speed, constant improvement, getting along with your peers, ultimately lifting each other up to make everybody better. It's not always easy in the beginning when you go in and you try to make cultural changes the way that you have. I'm curious for just some of your thoughts, if you will, if you could lend them to us on culture, cultural change, how you think about starting a team, how you think about taking over a team, and ultimately what you're trying to achieve as you go about building culture on teams everywhere you go.
Yeah, I think there's so much to unpack with that. And I know I'm going to forget something, but I'm going to listen to this back and kick myself for not saying it. I think one of the first things to do whenever I've taken on a new team, first and foremost, to let them get to know me and to sit back and observe, but not to a point of being passive, but just to understand all the ins and outs of how that team operates and who the different personalities are and what's driving the team, what's holding the team back. Because it's not always all bad, right? There's a lot of good things that are happening. And you also want to find out who your early adopters are going to be for certain things that you're looking to change. Having some good conversations with people to show them that you're here to help the team, not to destroy it. And then again, as I mentioned already, finding some quick wins. And also right from, the minute you take on a new team to up until, the present day is doing your very, very best not to alienate yourself from your team. So obviously the cliche is having an open door policy, but it's truly having one, right? Making sure that your team has easy access to you. My calendar is completely open for the whole company to see. They know what I'm doing at any given time. I'm also available for them if they need me for anything whatsoever. And I take the time to get to know them. My one-on-ones with my team isn't all business, right? I make sure that they know that I want to know about them. I want to know, what their wife's name is, their husband's name is, their pets' names, their children's names. And you make sure that you show them how much you care, right? These are good people. That's why they're on your team. And that's important to me. It does resonate well with the team. And on the flip side, I said this 1 second because I don't want to lead with this, but there's coaching up and there's coaching out too. So when you take on a new team, it's important to know that you haven't inherited a ready-made product, right? This is an evolving team, and people need to show that they want to be part of the solution, right? You're either a radiator or you're a drain, right? You're either going to radiate positivity and good vibes, or you're going to be a drain on the team. And everyone has an equal opportunity to show me which person they are. But ultimately, the expectations are high. Every team that I lead has a really high performing culture and high accountability across the board. I'm accountable to them just as much as they're accountable to me. And we have to be all, rowing in the right direction.
That's really well said. I'll leave it there because there's so much that we could potentially unpack. But I want to ask you, is there any question that comes to your mind that I should be asking you that I haven't already? I feel like there's been so much learning over the last 5 years. You talked about leading, the sales development. You're ultimately, responsible for training every single mortgage agent that we bring into this organization, and then responsible for training the operations people that we bring into this organization. And then you're leading the operations team for the brokerage. You're leading the operations team for the lender and the underwriters and the closing process. And there's so much cultural change that goes through, building from nearly zero, effectively in your case, to where we got. So what should I be asking you in your mind? Does that stoke anything for you?
I don't know. I think maybe what motivates me.
Great question.
That's the question. I think, what motivates me. And I think that's important, right? So ultimately, in those situations, those new roles that I took on, these were opportunities that as a business, I was called to kind of stand up and take on. And at first, going from sales to ops, for example, you start to wonder, you're like, is this the right move for me? Is that where I really want to be? I saw myself as a salesperson first, and I really liked all the people on that side. And I thought, is this going to be good for my career? Is this going to be good for my, day-to-day happiness? But ultimately, stopping and pausing and realizing that it's an opportunity that I need to seize and I need to show that I can achieve in different settings was a good thing. And for me, the people around me motivate me to seize those opportunities and to do my very best day in, day out. My wife and son are the biggest motivators in my life. Everything that I do, obviously, you do for them. And the people I lead motivate me. When I got into leadership, I knew that I would have others depending on me. And I know it sounds cheesy, but I don't take that opportunity or that responsibility lightly. And I take the time to get close to the people I lead by asking them what's standing in their way and what challenges they face. And our clients motivate me. At the end of the day, there's no business without our clients. And the processes we build are always centered on what's going to deliver the best experience for them.
That's well said. So I want to wrap by just asking you about impact and legacy. I know sometimes when we're young-ish, right?
Thank you.
I'll say that.
Yeah.
Yeah, young-ish.
Youngish is good.
We don't maybe spend as much time as we could or should thinking about overall impact and legacy. But as you look forward to your life, your career, and all the things that you probably still plan to achieve in that, like, how do you think about the lasting impact that you want to have and the legacy that you want to have on the people around you?
Yeah. So I don't have some big, master plan necessarily. I'm not looking to run for prime minister one day.
That's too bad.
It might be too bad, but I envision myself always working with people. Every role that I've been in has involved people in some aspect, and in my current one, involves people and process. And for me, the people part, the leadership aspect is the one I find most rewarding. There's nothing better than providing opportunities, challenging people, and seeing them grow as human beings, not just as team members. So I'd say that. I'd say my lasting impact that I'd like to make, and how I'd like to kind of set my sights on, would be continuing to fulfill that and working closely with people and helping impact the outcome for them.
The impact that we can have on others is something that I think that a lot of people go back to.
Yeah.
It's so key, because that's what it's all about. So thank you for sharing. Thanks for being on. Thanks for everything that you have done over the years for this business, and myself included, on a personal level. So much appreciated, Kyle.
Thank you very much for having me on.